Welcome, Mr. Paul Elam, to On Point. And how are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. Paul, I'm just wondering if you minded to share with us, with some of us that may not be too familiar with a bit about yourself, where you grew up, your family life as a kid, where you live now, and with whom.
Sure, I've come from a classically dysfunctional family in the American, I would say the old American West from Texas. I grew up in a military family, rather uneventful life, nothing too remarkable, lower middle class home, both parents at home, both parents that actually loved each other until my father passed, and came with all the typical dysfunction that you expect in most families. But I grew up, tried marriage a couple of times, didn't work out too well for me. I finally met somebody and have been together with her for the past 18 years. Not married though, maybe that was the trick. But I hail from Texas, but now I live in Southwest Virginia.
Okay. And let me take you back to being a 20-year-old. How does the Paul Elam of 20 years of age compare to the Paul Elam now, and what brought about your radicalism?
Well, radicalism's a funny word, but it's I think it's probably a really accurate term. I think the Paul Elam of 20 years old was typically stupid for what we would expect from a lot of 20-year-olds, sort of full of myself, ignorant without knowing it. The normal things you would expect from somebody 20 years old, and hopefully now I'm older and wiser and have experienced a lot of life, have made lots of mistakes and lived with them. Finally learned to take responsibility for them, and that set me on a path of wholeness.
So what was it that that changed you over the years, that made you so radical in these men's rights groups?
Well, again, let's talk about radical for a moment. The notion that men are human beings with issues that deserve as much attention as women's issues is pretty radical. That's a radical thought in this culture. The idea of men speaking out vociferously about their issues and challenging the world around them to examine those issues and to treat them as something more than just something to dismiss, that's pretty radical. So what the world calls radical, I call sensible. I think that men and women both have issues that righteously deserve attention, that deserve compassion and concern, that both sexes should have choices in their life available to them about the path that they want to live on. And unfortunately, that is a radical line of thought, but I'm hoping someday, probably not in my lifetime, almost certainly not in my lifetime, but perhaps in a generation or two, the idea of men as human beings won't be so radical.
That's a shame, isn't it? When you think it won't be in your lifetime, it's...
Well, I look at it this way. You know, the women's movement sort of started in earnest in the mid-1800s in the United States. At least that's our history, was Seneca Falls. Even after Seneca Falls, which I believe was in 1848, it was over another 70 years before women got the vote. And then it was another 50 years after that before gender feminism raised its head in the 1960s. So we're talking about over 100-year period, even though as a society, we tend to respond much more compassionately to women's issues. There's the thrust of the goodwill of people wanting to do the right thing by women behind them, and it still took over 100 years to make really remarkable changes. So I've just figured that that is just in the cards, that what we're seeing now is seeds being planted, And then
Yeah.
hopefully down the road, we'll see those sprout and grow into a better way of life for more men and women.
Yeah, sure, sure. There's been a lot of criticism from feminist groups and even the general public about you. So why don't we get this out in the open?
Okay.
Do you hate or have a great dislike for women?
Absolutely not. I do not have a hate or a great dislike for any group of people. I have a hatred and a great dislike of awful ideas.
Sure.
I feel like I hate. And I think what I see a lot of in modern feminism is hatred of men. And so I react to that. I think a lot of what you see from feminists in particular is projection. I work alongside, as an activist, I work alongside women and have for the past 10 years. They don't seem to think I hate them. My partner of 18 years doesn't seem to think that I hate her. My mother didn't seem to think that I hated her. But I hate bad ideas, and I'm willing to challenge them publicly and shoot them down where I think it's appropriate. And feminists don't like that very much. They don't like their narrative being challenged at all. So the logic on their part is that anybody who challenges their ideas of patriarchy theory and of domestic violence being an all male problem, their reaction to that is less than savory, to put it mildly.
Yeah, which was leading me on to, you know, why do they make you out to be such a hater? But
well, they have to,
basically, yeah,
because if they take on my ideas, if they challenge my thinking, if they respond directly to the challenges I make to feminist orthodoxy, then their arguments fall apart. So they have to just cast me as a hater. It's the best way not to challenge or deal with anything that I'm saying.
that's right. Absolutely. For people out there that are unaware of the rationale, what was your meaning behind the Bash a Violent Bitch month?
Oh boy, we're going to go back a long way now. Okay, that was about 10 years ago. It was a semi-satirical response to an article at Jezebel.com, the mainstream feminist website out there. I would consider very much the online flagship of the feminist movement. Had an article posted with the title, and I'll try to get this verbatim, but it's something like, "Have you ever hit your boyfriend? Because we have." And it was a lot of the staff and readers of Jezebel bragging about the physical pain and injury they had inflicted on their partners, some of them smashing his laptop, throwing it against a wall, punching him in the mouth, punching him in the nose, because he said something she didn't like. And if you'll pardon my language, I'm just going to quote them in the article. They say, "All we can say is you better not fuck with us." That was the response. That was the attitude toward being violent toward men, and it was being celebrated openly on their pages. So I did what I typically do when I'm doing provocative writing, and I reversed the gender. Yeah. And what if men started hitting back? And it wasn't so palatable all of a sudden. All of a sudden, it wasn't a glorious thing. It wasn't something to be bragged about. It was terrible. It was awful. Oh my God, how can you write this terrible thing? Never mind what we wrote, never mind that it was a response to that. And so all the mainstream media did was take my writings out of context, did not even tried to demonstrate that it was satirical writing. Juvenalian satire is a thing, apparently not to the literary geniuses in the mainstream media. And they characterized it as me seriously advocating violence against women. Of course, it was absolutely
typical,
wrong.
So what were the key factors that made you start the movement A Voice for Men?
Well, I studied the history of the men's movement, and that was a challenge by itself because it's not a widely documented history. There are little bits and pieces. I found out, for instance, in 1929, they tried to have a men's rights conference in Vienna, and it was shut down, mainly by very conservative traditional thinkers who, just like today, don't want to hear men whine. So they shut it down. There was a man named E. Belfort Bax as early as the late 1800s who wrote a book called The Fraud of Feminism, The Subjugation of Men. And as a matter of fact, he wrote a series of books and articles about men's issues and men's rights. I consider him the grandfather of the movement. Then along came later in the 70s, we had people like Warren Farrell and others that were stepping out, talking about these issues. And what happened each time, for instance, Belfort Bax, as I understand it, died penniless. They just absolutely forced him out of publishing, forced him out of employment. He died broke. And the rest of the guys that tried to step forward with these issues were often, like Farrell was, patted on the head saying, "You're a good boy, thanks for saying those nice things, and now we're moving on to women's issues." So I looked at it and I thought, well, do I want to get a pat on the head, or do I want to get people talking about these issues? And if I wanted to get people talking about these issues, I was going to have to get provocative. I looked and studied different social movements, a movement for gay rights, for women's rights, for American civil rights. All of those movements started with anger. Every last one of them. They started with righteously expressed anger about issues that were affecting those populations. And without that anger, there would have been no movement. It would have never happened. So I took a deep breath and said, okay, here we go. It looks like I'm diving into the deep end of the pool. And I started writing provocative material, and sure enough, people noticed. And they didn't notice in a good way, but I also point out that they noticed to the effect of the Red Pill movie happening, which did a lot to get these issues out. So I have to say that despite my critics' admonitions that I should have been much nicer about how I said things, what I did worked, as well as something was going to work in this day and age. So I get to stand by my work.
Moving on to your recent book entitled Men, Women, Relationships and Surviving the Plague of Modern Masculinity. I'll just read a little statement that I wrote for you from just surmising a little bit from what I've read. I read the book. I crammed it in a week. I hope you're impressed.
Well, hey, listen, if you can ask me questions, at least you read it.
I did. So I found it very fascinating, and I felt that some of what you touched on was already what I already felt and knew about the gender roles, and you just cemented my thoughts. Other aspects of it I found quite confronting as a woman. I recognise some of the traits of women you describe within myself, however mild they may be. I do consider myself to be quite a reasonable team player within a relationship as a wife. But I do know that I have used my own femininity to get what I want out of situations.
My God, an honest woman. I love it.
It has left me in a mode of reflection. For the record, though, I am a woman over 40 that's never taken an antidepressant in my life. Just saying.
Okay. Point taken.
So that's just a little bit from my point of view. Could I ask you what your partner Stacey thinks about your theories, and is she a unicorn as referenced in the narrative?
No, she's not a unicorn. We've had struggles along these lines for the entire duration of our relationship. Fortunately, our connection to each other and our love for each other has been more valuable to us than any places that we differ.
Yeah.
She does recognize much of the truth in what I have to say. She acknowledges these issues, acknowledges her own role in things, and to use your words, how she's used her femininity to get her way, or at least to try to. And of course, not being able to do that with a person like me created real unique challenges in a relationship, but it didn't create anything that we haven't overcome. I think it's also important to say, this is a book for men, written in men's language, the way men talk to each other, acknowledging the issues. For instance, when we talk about women's use of their femininity or the use of gynocentrism in order to dominate in a relationship, which this is the lived experience of many, many men. So many of the men that I talk to in my practice and that I've worked with over the past 35 years as a counselor are pulling their hair out, trying to figure, what do I have to do so that she'll be satisfied?
Yeah.
And they're sometimes 10 and 20 years into a marriage, still pulling their hair out. That's still their lived experience. So that book is for them. And I do recognize, you know, if I was a woman reading that book, I would be pissed off.
I wasn't actually. I found it extremely enlightening and confronting, but I wasn't overly offended because, you know, not trying to be a martyr, but I actually do feel that I'm a reasonable woman in today's society. And I know there's a lot that aren't, but there is a lot that are.
Well, yes, and I hear from them in my email. I do get that. But yeah, it is a confronting book. I don't think that we ever honestly talk about these issues unless we're confronted. There's no way to talk about power grabs, gynocentric power grabs in a relationship without confronting some issues in women that they are not used to having challenged.
Yeah.
It's just very difficult to do that. So if you tone down your language enough so that there's nothing confrontational about it, they probably won't hear what you're saying.
Yeah, sure. So what drove you to write it? What got you going about it that made you want to write this particular book?
Well, I think it was to reach out to men. The primary reason of that being I wanted to offer men a different way of seeing themselves.
Yeah.
To let them know that they could have values, that they can have needs and desires and wants in a relationship. And guess what? They can say no.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Every human being needs the option to say no. Men and women in relationships say no to each other, say no to themselves, say no to family members, to bosses, to whatever in life. Everybody has, it is important for everybody to be able to say and mean no. And we hear this a lot about women's issues. And I know there was a mantra for decades, no means no. And you need to listen to women when they say no. Nobody ever thought for a moment, what about men saying no? Because that is like, what do you mean? A man say no to something his wife wants? Are you kidding me? Happy wife, happy life. If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy.
Yeah.
Those are the mantras that we live with, and they reveal a sickness in our society about men and women that I think desperately needs a cure. Men can say no too, and women can learn to take a no.
Absolutely. I actually find it a bit of a turn on when a man does say no, to be quite honest with you.
I think a lot of women do, because they're attracted to confidence.
Yeah, power.
And a guy that grovels and says yes to everything, I think eventually turns women off.
For sure, for sure.
So
going into the book a bit more, going in about the mail order brides. You mentioned that importing brides is not a good idea. and you provide some very strong arguments against this. For the viewers, can you please explain why mail order brides are not a good idea?
One, I have to say, I'm sad to live in a society where that needs an explanation, but I will go ahead nonetheless and answer your question.
It does, though.
I think
It
it's
does.
important, it does need an explanation.
Yeah.
Imagine what somebody is looking for if they put their picture and short bio on a website, hoping for a stranger to pick them out of a lineup and propose marriage.
Mm-hmm.
What is the motivation in there? Now, I certainly don't have an issue with understanding that there is a business aspect to all marriages. That we keep finances in mind and things like that. Those go into the decision-making process. But I encourage men to stop leading with their wallet all the time. And a mail order bride setup doesn't leave them any other option. There is no getting to know somebody or any of that. It is a cash deal, absolutely transactional, and motivated by people who come from very poor regions in the world dreaming of a richer life.
Yeah, yeah.
Guys, that means it's not about you. It's about what you can provide only. And gosh, if you start a relationship like that, and then of course, then there's all the nightmare stories of women that come over to the United States from Asia, from other countries, promptly divorce the guy and take everything he has. And that's bad enough. I mean, I'm saying that, and that is like a very, very likely prospect if you get a mail order bride. She's going to rob you using American courts, and that's exactly what's going to happen. But even if that didn't happen, what do you think about a relationship that's founded on your wallet? I mean, solely and exclusively, only on what you can provide, not who you are as a person, not, and never mind the conversation of asking her, what does she bring to a relationship, which I encourage men to ask all the time, and to ask women, what do they bring to the table? A lot of women in our own culture get shocked if you ask that. What do you bring to the table? Well, me, of course. And it needs to be more than that. You don't get that out of a mail order bride situation. I just think it's understandable in America. And here's where we get into an area that is uncomfortable for a lot of women to hear, but I think it needs to be said. The average woman in America is a bad investment. If we're just talking averages, bad investment. Commitment issues, propensity to use the legal system to get what they want, having a sense of entitlement, demanding, going in the door, everything is about them. This is what causes men to turn to foreign brides. They either think they can't get a woman at all unless they do it that way, or they are so turned off by what's available in the dating market in the society that they live in that they erroneously think that if I turn to another culture, well, you know, that might work. But guys, what I would tell you is if you want to turn to a different culture to find a more traditionally minded woman, move there. Live there for several years, learn the language, learn the culture, then meet a woman, and perhaps it will work out. I don't know. But shipping her over like she came from Amazon, not a very smart idea.
And I can say the same for Australia. You speak all in American terms, but it's exactly the same here. And I have known a couple of male friends that have done that, and it's not ended well. There's no stimulation either during the marriage. The broken English, for example. There's no humor. There's no getting each other, for starters. Never mind the wallet factor and everything else. So, yeah.
Yes, I actually had a cousin that did that. That got a bride from the Philippines. And the first thing she said when she finally entered his home was, "Where's your big TV?" And they ended up, of course, in divorce. Tragic story. I mean, that part of it was funny, but the rest of what happened to him wasn't.
Right. She took him to the cleaners, did she?
Well, by the time she was done, he couldn't afford a big TV if he wanted one.
Good God. Oh dear. Another part of your book, commitment tests. I'll just read my little statement out to you. I love your advice to men in the book. Testing women prior to any sort of commitment, testing them out within the honeymoon phase, and if there's any grief or any danger, they should run for the hills. Can you reiterate to our audience some of the warning signs to look out for? It's very humorous, but very true. I particularly love the term, the fucking loon. Excuse my French. Please share some of your other observations with our audience, i.e. cat ladies.
Well, there's a lot to cover there, but I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. You have to know, what happens typically in relationships is that we meet, and then there is this, when there's a spark there, you have this immediate chemistry, and both people go on their best behavior, and they're very careful to treat the other one with kindness and to be very indulgent. And no, we can do what you want to do. No, we'll do what you want to do. That's fine. That's the dance of infatuation that is actually sort of a temporary form of psychosis that humans go through in the pair bonding process. And then what happens is, after a period of time, say 90 days, 6 months or whatever, the infatuation fades. And then you have two individuals and their family of origin issues that they're bringing with them into the relationship, and the infatuation is not making them blind anymore. So this starts happening. Well, here's what I suggest. One, during the infatuation stage, there's a couple of things you need to look out for. One is too much information too soon. If on a first date, the woman you're dating is divulging the sexual trauma in her life, having been molested. If that's coming out on the first date, guys, you better run. You better run. And it isn't that, it's one thing when two people get to know each other and have time to build some trust and then start divulging each other's secrets. That's a great, healthy way to bond. It's a wonderful way to connect to somebody and to make that friendship, that connection, something remarkable and special. It really is. But when people gush too much information too fast, there's personality issues in there that you want to be aware of. There is something in borderlines called love bombing. When you're with somebody early on, now it's normal during infatuation to think very highly of the person you're infatuated with, but within a couple of days of meeting, if a woman is telling you, you're the most remarkable, special man ever that walked the earth, I can't believe I found you, buddy, you better run. Because as surely as you're going to be put on that pedestal, she is going to knock you off when you disappoint her. And the fall from grace can be dangerous. One way I suggest preemptively to deal with some of this is simply to dispense a no early on, even while you're infatuated, to say no to something inconsequential. Now, I'm not saying if her dog gets run over and she needs somebody to comfort her, that's not the time to say no. Say yes to that. But pick anything. If she says she wants to go see a chick flick, say no. So that's not the kind of movie I want to see. Thanks anyway, but you can go with your friends. And you watch her very, very carefully after you say that. If she's temporarily disappointed, oh, I'm sad about that, but okay, I get it. Then you've got somebody you can work with. But if she says, fine, in that tone of voice that promises retribution for saying her no, think about what that means, guys. Think about what it means when somebody promises you payback for having a boundary. Because if she will do that during the time that you're infatuated, she'll run your life with it down the road. So any hint of vindictiveness simply because you didn't want to see a movie or go to lunch that day or eat at a particular restaurant or something else equally inconsequential, that is a glaring, glaring warning sign.
Yeah.
We all have to hear no in our lives,
Yeah.
and that includes the woman you're with. And if she can't hear a no without wanting to punish you, then it is on you if you take one step further with her. Anything she does after that, you got nobody to blame but yourself. And one thing I try to drive home in this book a lot is that this isn't about pointing the fingers at women and saying they're the evil ones. This is about you taking care of yourself and having boundaries and having values that you live by. And if you don't do that, don't come whining to my email box because she turned around and treated you badly, because you'll get no sympathy from me for that.
That's right. It is. It's about exerting your authority, you know, as an individual. That's what I got from the book, that
Absolutely.
It's not about being dominant and controlling. It's about just simply owning yourself and not doing something you don't want to do.
Thank you for framing it that way, because that's exactly it. It is not about controlling women, being dominant over them, or anything of that sort. If you need a woman you can dominate, don't buy my book, because it's just not for you. That's not your personality type. This is for men, who the majority of us, who want to approach relationships as somewhat of a partnership. That's what it's about. And if a partner can't hear the word no to something, they're not a partner. That's all that's saying. But Lisa, thank you for saying it that way. It's not about control of another person.
So speaking of the opposite sex, have you seen an increase in female involvement in men's rights and activism, especially from mothers and grandmothers, daughters, since you started?
Well, I've certainly seen an increase in women speaking up about the issues. It's happening in a lot of places. I mean, this conversation's an example of that. There's been a number of women involved for years, people like Janice Fiamingo and Karen Strawn and others that have done a great job. But I do see more jumping on the bandwagon. I think it's a great thing. I think there are challenges that come with that, because, you know, you have a movement, a men's movement. I firmly believe that it should be predominantly men's voices that are articulating these issues. And the logic is sound. People will listen to women more than they will listen to men, generally speaking. And so I get the logic, and I welcome women into this movement. I truly do, and I'm appreciative of the ones that show up. But the success or failure of what we're doing, I think, can be measured of whether or not that people are paying attention to men. And we have a long way to go in that regard. If you look out there now, you see that with time and a little effort, almost any attractive woman can build a good sized audience on men's issues. Much harder for men to do that. It's a bigger challenge in that respect, but that's just sort of the nature of the beast. And it's the nature of the human species to behave this way, which makes our movement all the more challenging. We're actually going against about 3 million years of biology and social programming to do this. So it's rough, but hey, all aboard as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah. And do you think that an action group with mothers and grandmothers and sisters makes a difference then? Like you were saying, it really is only if a man's group is taken seriously, even though women are out there fighting. But do you think that a women's group on behalf of men really does have its place?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you've got a brother or a father or a son or any significant men in your life I mean, back in the day, I identified as a feminist. I was concerned about women's issues, and I thought it was perfectly appropriate for men to speak about those things.
Yeah.
It's absolutely important for women to speak up about this. I was mentioning the difficulty in listening to men sort of as a side topic to this. It's another struggle that runs parallel to women coming into the movement. But absolutely, it's important, because gynocentrism dictates that women will get an audience and compassion about issues that men will not receive.
Will men going their own way make a difference, do you think?
I think it already has.
Yeah. You think it's making an impact?
What's that?
You think it's making an impact? You know, that
It's
women are
certainly
pricking their ears up and going, oh, there's a lot of men that are going out alone, don't want to get married, don't want to settle down, don't want to cohabit. You think it's making an impact already?
I think it absolutely makes an impact. This is why you see the panic in the feminist establishment over this. And there's more and more articles springing up all the time about, I think the last one we covered on regarding men was the dangerous rise of men who won't date feminists. And there is a rise in men who won't date women. I mean, and there's a lot of different forms of MGTOW too. It's important to know that not all MGTOW swear off women completely. Some of them date. They're just not open to cohabitation. Some guys don't date or have anything to do with women. But here's the thing that I love about MGTOW. MGTOW, in whatever form that it takes, is an individual man stopping and taking stock of his life, considering his safety, his legal vulnerabilities, everything there is in life, and making a conscious, informed decision to move toward a healthier life for himself. A lot of these guys in MGTOW are busy living their lives, and they're enjoying fulfilled lives, and they're choosing not to include women in a lot of that because of the fact that society puts a loaded gun in women's hands, that they can put a stop to a guy's happiness in his life with a pointed finger at any time. And so these guys avoid that, and in doing that, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of these guys, they end up focusing on their own interests, their own hobbies, their own path to self-actualization. So one man at a time, I think the movement is great, and I would look forward, it won't happen in my lifetime, but I look forward to the day that there is enough MGTOW that it causes women to wake up and to understand they must bring safety and something else to the table in a relationship. Or there's going to be more and more guys that I'm saying, sorry, I'm not doing this. And they're not even saying sorry, but they're just not doing it.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, it starts with self-actualization, and that is the uppermost important thing to a human being. And at the end of the day, men can go out and get laid. They want to get laid, they go out and get laid. They don't need a woman at home. They go out and have their job, and they play soccer with their mates, and they go and get a lay every now and again. So women beware.
Well, and I think too that for some MGTOW, and this is where I know some guys in the MGTOW community won't like what I have to say, and that's okay. I don't just upset feminists. I take my turns upsetting everybody, it seems.
Okay.
It is, to me, there is, what I found was that the things about marriage and relationship that are so unsettling for many MGTOW are things that I can protect myself from and that I can prevent from happening simply by having values and living by them within my relationship. I tell my partner no, and I tell my partner stop. And of course she has that freedom and that flexibility with me too. It's the way it's supposed to be. But what I hear sometimes from some MGTOW men is that, oh, it doesn't matter what you do, a woman will never be happy. I'm like, well, God, quit whining about that. Quit whining. Whose job is it for her to be? Let it be her job to be happy. And you take on your happiness. But you're saying you're helpless against the power of women in relationships, and that is a chosen role in life. If you think you don't have anything to say, you can't have a happy relationship, maybe you can't. And maybe it's because you're being weak. And
weak and
I
negative.
think some men need to hear that.
Mm.
You don't have to get married. You don't have to make yourself legally vulnerable, and depending on where you live. Now, I know in countries like Australia, you end up married de facto if you live with a person long enough. So that's something for them to consider. That's not true where I am. I can live together forever, and I'm not legally married.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I'm a Pom. I don't know if you realised yet. I'm from the UK, living in Australia.
I recognize the accent. Now, you didn't sound New Zealand or.
No, I've lived in New Zealand too. I've been around the world, but I am a Pom essentially, as the Aussies call us. But no, I didn't realise that about America. So you don't have any de facto laws.
It depends on the state.
Okay, yeah, sure.
In some states, your de facto marriage. In other states, as long as you follow some legal guidelines, not tangling financial accounts or insurances and things like that, there's things you can do that you can live with somebody and not be married for your entire life.
Right.
You just have to add that. So when a guy says, I can't have a relationship with a woman because it always goes back to what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
I say, well, your problem is you. It's not her.
Yeah. Yeah. You pick your location well in the USA then, hey?
Absolutely.
I just want to ask, who's Harry? In your acknowledgements in your book, you mentioned a Harry from Australia.
Oh.
Why was he so important?
Harry from Australia?
Yeah. Do you remember that part?
Harry's not from Australia. Harry's a Pom.
That's one of the questions I got asked from one of my viewers, who Harry is and what he means to your journey.
Harry's name was Carl Glasson, and he had a website for years and years and years called angryharry.com. As a matter of fact, I have that website now. It's still available. Harry is one of the great fathers of the online men's movement, probably the great father of the online men's movement. We lost him in 2014 to an aneurysm. He was a great guy, supporter of AVFM all the way through, a personal mentor to me as just somebody to talk to that would understand what I was going through in a way that almost nobody else could. Harry and I used to talk for hours on the internet about men's issues and about my work and what I was doing. And he was what I call one of the great ones, still missing.
Yeah, that's really nice. And do you have that sort of relationship with Warren Farrell too? Do you talk often, you guys? Or
Warren and I talk from time to time. We're in semi-regular contact. We're mutual fans of each other's work. Warren is one of the ones that was so soft-spoken and warm and wonderful, and got patted on the head and told to run along. But even as somebody with a very different style than mine, Warren has always been a big supporter, always recognized the importance of what I did. And of course, it was his work that put me on to men's issues to begin with. It was The Myth of Male Power that I read when it came out, and that turned my life around. So I have this huge debt to Warren.
I'm about to read the boy crisis of his, so I'll get into that soon.
It's well worth reading.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. So moving into a bit of girl power regime, it was very interesting when you said that the feminists have essentially become the alpha male of society, or as you put, the alphas have become the beta muscle for the feminist mafiosa. Would you mind elaborating on this more?
Well, what do we see with male feminists? We see a servile class of people ever mindful to watch their step. You can see them all over Twitter running around attacking MRAs. This is what they do. And I think they fancy themselves the sort of heads of ideological harems. They're preening for the attention of feminist women, for their approval. And
Yeah.
it probably does work to get them a pat on the head from feminist women. But it's more complicated than that too. If you look at really terrible laws like we have in the United States, the Violence Against Women Act being one of them, this big, huge barrel of pork with all kinds of money problems in it, money unaccounted for. These are laws that are passed by both liberals and conservatives, almost all men, both sides of the political fence.
Yeah.
Because it's our job. We need to take care of women, and we will take care of women even when we have the illusion of taking care of women and we're not. The VAWA has not reduced violence against anybody, and it's helped us ignore violence against men that happens in relationships. And every few years, both parties renew it into law again, just as pretty as you please. And these are the muscle. I mean, it's $600 million worth of absolute waste and corrupt money involved in it. Yet we do nothing but pass it over and over again. And that is with the help of men. Feminism is a men's issue because men tolerate it and men support it.
One of the greatest takeaways from your book is how you shift the perceived blame from feminism and place it at the door of the government. You allude to how they want to double their taxable income and rationalize everything else to obtain that. How did you feel when you first realized that concept?
I was pissed. When it dawned on me what's happening, and again, to expand on it a little bit more, what happened was that the corporatocracy, which is one of my favorite ways to describe governance, modern governance, it's government by and for and on behalf of corporations. They benefit from double the taxpayers. They benefit from needing two incomes to run a household. I mean, this seemed to happen in the world without anybody really noticing what was going on. There was a time in my youth when a man could work and take care of an entire family, feed them, clothe them, get them medical care, raise children, put them through school, all these things, and allowing those children to have the benefit of a parent at home, providing them the nurturing, the caretaking, to be there for their first steps, to be there for their first words, to be there as a present force in their lives for the better. And now our children are raised by strangers. And nobody seemed to notice that there was something really kind of weird about that, hey, how did we go from one person being able to take care of a family to two people doing it and barely making ends meet at that? And I can't help but believe that that was orchestrated. You've got double the tax base, you got twice the amount of consumers, and you even see in the advertising narratives the way they pit men and women against each other in competitive ways, all about getting them to spend more. And it happens. It's a tragedy. I think that is how they've destroyed the family as we know it. And they're trying to rebuild it into a PC model that just doesn't work.
No. Yep, been there myself with all that. But anyway, with regards to the hashtag #MeToo movements, in the book, you talk about enjoying the show. and how you quote also, as far as I'm concerned, this not only hasn't gone too far, it hasn't gone far enough. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I think sometimes medicine tastes bad. I think sometimes it chokes going down. And the only way I think our society is going to wake up to any of this is through the excesses. And the excesses are there in abundance. People are being destroyed as a matter of routine these days. Some guys, scumbags. Some guys didn't do anything wrong, but in the end, didn't matter. Only thing that matters is believe the woman.
Yeah.
And I think that that is a prescription for tragedy and for destruction. When you say you automatically, I mean, the whole idea of jurisprudence, at least in the United States, is that you're innocent until proven guilty. And that doesn't mix with believe the woman, because what they're really saying is believe the victim. Assume that the crime happened, the exact opposite of due process. And I think we need enough people destroyed by this lack of due process before powerful people start waking up and understanding that this is wrong and that it needs to change. So I say, bring Me Too on. These guys, most of these guys now, Harvey Weinstein, others, they're the same guys that have been contributing to this sick narrative to begin with. So at least they're getting the right guys most of the time.
But what were they doing in his hotel room in the first place?
Well, of course, but we're not allowed to ask those questions.
I do anyway.
But yes, I do too. What were you doing in his hotel room at 2:00 in the morning? And by the way, we all know that Hollywood is a casting couch culture, and that like it or not, women are lined up from downtown Los Angeles all the way to Milwaukee to get roles, and many of them willing to do almost anything to get it. And of course, you've got scumbag producers that have been there since in Hollywood since the 1920s, doing what they do. And it was only a matter of time till something like Me Too emerged. But most of what we see in Me Too is regret rape, and women who are coming out 10, 20 years after the fact with Gloria Allred in tow saying, I was victimized. Oh, by the way, I can't prove it. And yeah, I was at his hotel at 2:00 in the morning with no witnesses, but I'm still a victim. And now, of course, believe the woman takes over, and we're all supposed to bow before that.
Yeah, come on, girls.
Yes, come on is right.
What the hell? Yeah. Does
and
not
they're
work
going
with me
to
at all.
Mike Pence rules, where men are not mentoring women, not wanting to be alone with them, not wanting to help them with career development, not wanting to hire them. This stuff hurts a lot more women. You'll get, for every Harvey Weinstein you bag and put in jail or destroy or whatever you do with them, I guarantee you there's 1,000 women with doors silently closed in their face.
Yeah.
Over this. And
he's got the right idea, this Pence guy. Hey, totally.
Yep.
Stand back.
Yes.
For sure. So moving into man space, and excuse the statement that I'm going to read out, but it's a question from our audience member, which includes a statement. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, men always had their own space, whether out hunting or fighting wars. There were rarely women and children in that space. In his book, Tribe, Sebastian Junger observed that soldiers only really showed signs of PTSD when they left their platoons and their buddies, which highlights the importance of men being amongst men. You mentioned in your book that men have to create their own space. However, this often brings about criticism and discrimination. Do you have any ideas as to how men can overcome this?
By finding their spine.
Balls.
Yes. by finding their balls and using them. You know, men have not lost any space that they didn't surrender. And I don't think we give them a pass on that. We are, for instance, we're doing things now with regarding men. We're sponsoring monthly and weekly group meetings of men. It's strictly male space, no girls allowed. And guess what? Nobody stopped us. Yeah. Nobody stops men from doing anything that they want to do. Men surrendered this stuff. It's very interesting that the person who asked the question brought up this notion of men doing better with PTSD when they're with their comrades. And that's absolutely true. It's unfortunately been exploited by the Pentagon in the United States. We, of course, and I don't want to veer off into politics, but we have a nasty habit of getting in preemptive wars around the world, which is a tragedy. And the Pentagon took that information and said, well, look, what we found is that if a guy has post-traumatic stress from combat, the best thing to do is to bring him back to the field of combat so he can be with his friends. And there's your male space. So they use that to exploit these guys. Unfortunately, instead of creating male space for them through the VA system in the United States, they're saying, oh, look, the best thing for you is to go back to combat.
Just go back to war.
Go back to war, no problem. But in more reasonable terms, yes, men have lost a lot of their space. They have had, now we have women reporters in locker rooms. I mean, we wouldn't dare send a man into a...
No.
riots if we tried to pull that. Stand up and say no.
Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, Paul, you just lagged there for a second. We'll get that edited when it goes to. But we were just you were just talking about you wouldn't have male reporters in a female locker room.
Yeah, and basically we have females in male locker rooms because men have permitted it. They've tolerated it. One of the things that we do with men is that we condition them from birth to defer to women. We condition them from birth to not complain about their own lot in life. It's why you see so many men work through illness and injury because we're just told to shut up, whatever's happening, be okay with it and don't make a fuss. Well, men are pretty obedient to that programming for the most part. And so they simply saying no to women is not in the male lexicon. And that needs to change.
And they're only human too.
Exactly.
Yeah. What would you say is the ultimate hurdle that men need to jump in order to be treated in a more equitable way, especially in the family law system?
Probably their own cowardice. And I know this is brutally hard on men. We have a movement that doesn't depend on political change. It doesn't depend on legal change. It depends on individual change in the lives of men. It's always ourselves are the biggest hurdle. We're much more likely, when I hear from men, I am much more likely to hear from a guy saying, what are you whining about? And I could be talking about, you know, a rash of suicides in desperate, despondent men, and I'll actually have men say, and some women say, what are you whining about? You're just, you know, men have all the power, blah, blah, blah. Until men stand up to that, we're not going to get change. It's just not going to happen. The cultural change precedes legislative and political change. You must have cultural change first or it doesn't happen, period. We're just starting to see the inkling of cultural change now because we are starting to have discussions like this. There are more people saying what about men's issues than there ever have been before. This is starting to happen. Another 50, 60 years, who knows? There may be political and cultural change. But the only obstacle that I'm convinced the only obstacle in men's way is themselves.
Absolutely.
And
It's
men
like with
also
anything.
being willing to speak up for their sons.
Yeah.
You know, how many classrooms do we have right now where they are literally teaching that boys are bad?
Mm-hmm.
And how many fathers are going to that school and pulling their kids out and finding them alternatives to that kind of brainwashing?
Yeah, not many.
No, they said they take it quietly and passively. And so we can't
Are they
blame
even aware, though? The majority, are they even aware of that? We're only aware because we're in these circles, but the majority of men out there in society that are going day to day, going through separation or whatever, most of them aren't even aware of this kind of
they're not.
thoughts,
I
train of
agree.
thought.
But I believe fully that it's a chosen ignorance. If, for instance, if a man's daughter came home from school and said, we had a lecture in class today and I found out how bad girls are and how they do really terrible things, I can promise you fathers would be at that school.
Yeah.
They would absolutely do it. Part of the problem is that too many men agree with this hatred of men. Their sons will come home and say, they teach me about all the bad things boys do. And the father is more likely to say, well, yeah, pay attention to that because boys do some bad things. It is an ignorance, but it's chosen ignorance. And I don't think we can give men a pass because they're not thinking things through. We have to challenge those guys and inform them that they're a big part of the problem.
Sure. It's awful.
It is awful.
It is.
We're not
when I've got
dealing
sons,
with
you know,
happy, warm, fuzzy things here. They're very, very difficult and very challenging. And again, without the confrontation, without being upfront and challenging people on their thinking, nothing's going
to happen. No. Do you have any ideas as to how America, Australia, and even globally we can unite to fight against the discrimination within family law in particular?
Well, gosh, no, I don't. I mean, again, I'm not trying to sound pessimistic, but I'm going to end up saying the same things many times. What we need is men who are aware, even if they won't accept the fact that they're human beings, that they have rights and that they have issues that need attention, at least accept that their sons do. Just at least accept that your sons are worthy of school environments where they aren't demeaned by ideological teachers. But what I've really, Lisa, what I've come down to in this is that this is a movement of saving men one at a time. That the idea of massive global or even countrywide change will probably eventually happen. But the first thing that we have to do is reach out to guys when the system bites them and let them know that there's alternatives. Because if you've got a guy that's just walking out of family court, he's a lot more open to my message than he was before he walked in.
Yeah.
Reaching these guys, letting them know that what's happening to them, what's happening to their children and to families in this situation is wrong, but also challenging men who don't fight and asking them what their problem is. Why
and that's the biggest thing out here, isn't it? It's actually the people that are in our circles on Facebook and in all our groups, we haven't got a problem with. It's the people that are going day to day along with their life, going through a divorce, parental alienation, that are unaware of these groups, that are unaware of these fights, and they're just blinkered to it all. And I don't want my son and my stepsons to be blinkered. This is why I am doing what I'm doing, to try and create that awareness. And my ambition is to go into schools and actually teach it. Awesome. as a subject, relationships, dynamics as a subject, not bloody bullshit algebra or whatever else they have. I want to go in there and teach kids how to deal with relationships, and like what you're saying, be empowered.
Yes. If we got one good thing out of the feminist movement, it was the concept of empowerment based on sex. And this applies to men every bit as much as it does to women. Most men don't realize it because they're too busy trying to please women in order to have women accept them. And they're so psychologically dependent on that they sell their own souls and sell the souls of their sons to it. And it is, again, I don't like pointing feminists teach poison. Feminism is cancer, in my opinion, but it's a treatable cancer, and men are just likely to let it metastasize as to treat it. It's unfortunate, but that's why I've always been a proponent of we're trying to say one guy at a time, and at least create a subculture, an intellectual refuge for men and women that look past all this bullshit, all this garbage, all this hate, and at least they can come together and, you know, have a retreat, the mainstream garbage that's out there, because massive scale, we're just in the infancy stage of this. But that doesn't mean it's hopeless. It makes it more important for people like you and me and others to really dig into this work. Because someday, if we plant enough seeds, this will take root and it'll cause change in society, but only if we keep doing the work. Yeah,
we have to. We have to keep fighting, and that's the message I'm always getting at. And to unite, that's a big problem. The lack of unity, especially within male groups, I find very disappointing. Well, there's a lot of egos out there. Pardon?
That's our nature. Men are wired to compete with each other.
I know.
And I know. It's why I advise men who are starting their own efforts. Is one thing I do with a voice for men. I'm in charge there. It's not a democracy. And men don't govern by committee worth a damn. All we do is end up tearing each other apart. And you see that in the men's movement all the time. Guys think, I have a slightly different idea than you, so we need to go to war. It's crazy. But I suggest to everybody starting efforts on men's issues, if you're starting initiatives, put one person in charge. Because if you try to govern by committee, men don't do that.
We have recently found this out ourselves as a team, the Family Advocates team. And we've learned from that ourselves, which I won't go into right now. But you are so right.
I've been there, done that many times. So right. I can relate.
I've got some quick fire questions for you now.
Okay.
So first of all, do you feel that men's voices are being heard and their rights taken more seriously under President Trump?
Yes, I do. President Trump is the only president who has ever uttered the words that it's a very dangerous time for young men in our society. Actually, my jaw dropped to the floor. I heard an American president actually say something like that. He assigned Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, to rescind the Dear Colleague letter. They are in current negotiations right now with Warren Farrell for a council on men and boys at the White House, which I think if Trump is reelected, fingers crossed, that will actually materialize. So there is no doubt that the Trump administration is aware of these issues. They're particularly aware of the toxicity of modern feminism, and they're actually doing something about it.
That's good. Very optimistic. Yeah.
It
Good.
is.
If there was one thing you could say to the radical feminists out there, what would it be?
Make peace with your father. Make peace with your
all
father.
these girls with daddy issues, hey?
Absolutely right. That's feminism is projected father issues. I never met a virulent, toxic feminist who had a good relationship with their father. And I can tell you from personal experience, just from working through issues as a normal person in everyday life, your healing is in forgiveness. That's a critical part. I get into some of that work too, both in my writing and in my practice. But if you're a hateful, if you're an angry feminist that sees patriarchy under every rock and thinks men have been bad for the world and it's time for women to rule, please forgive your father's shortcomings and try to make peace with his memory.
Spot on, spot on. I've got another one for you now. Do you have any regrets over previous things you've said or done? Opportunities missed, looking back in hindsight, that you wish you could correct?
God, a ton. I mean, we don't, that would be a 3-hour
Anything
interview.
specific then? Anything really significant?
Let me see. Probably some, there's no doubt some things that are too personal for me to discuss here that I have regrets over. But in terms of what I've done as an activist, I would have started sooner. I would have probably been louder. Probably put more energy into provocation, because what I found was that compared to other efforts, that had an effect that I don't think I could have manufactured being more buttoned down and civil, which would, if you knew me in personal life, you'd know I'd much prefer a more civil discourse, and I believe in people getting along with each other and resolving problems like adults. But I think I would have been louder and harsher in the beginning, but it's hard to say. I was pretty loud and harsh. So I don't know if I really would change anything. Other than, well, I probably would have been born a Rockefeller if I could change that. But other than that, I can't think of anything.
Just exacerbated what you are, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah. I
think so. I think I would have probably done that and been more intense, but who knows? Hindsight's 20/20.
Of course. The death row question. If you could impart any knowledge in this arena before you left this earth, whether it to be a man, woman, or child, society in general, what would your one piece of advice be?
Well, these are tough questions.
Sorry.
One piece of advice before parting the earth, learn to get comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
Learn to embrace who you are and your own values and live by them. And if anyone doesn't like who you are, you can invite them. Well, I'll let you fill in the blank on that.
I know what you're thinking.
I think that's the biggest crisis for men, is they are so trained to be hamsters on wheels, to be seals balancing a beach ball on their nose, trying to impress women, that they lose track of who they are. And you can't be obsequious with an entire class of people and self-sacrificing and believe the woman and live on your knees and be comfortable with who you are. You simply can't do that. There are guys that'll tell you they can. I'm telling you they can't. Getting comfortable in your own skin means focusing on yourself, your needs, the things you want in life, your values, what you believe in, not what she believes in, not what she wants. When you get that straight and get comfortable in your own skin, then you can give to a relationship in a lot more healthy way. But if you're just, gee, what do I have to do to get your attention? To me, that's not being a man. That's just being a clown.
Living on autopilot. It's not living, is it?
No, it's not. And a lot of guys don't realize. I mean, one of the things, a common theme I've seen in guys that I've counseled is that when they look back at their quote unquote blue pill lives, how they behaved, how they would spend money they didn't have, they would do all kinds of crazy stuff just for a chance to be with a woman. They look back on that with great embarrassment.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, I can't believe I was that way. Well, yeah, we all were for a time. But getting out of that and into your own life, your own skin and your own values, best advice I could give anybody, man or woman.
That's perfect. It's absolutely spot on. And that concludes our chat. It wasn't that hard, really, was it?
No, it wasn't. I feel like I'm not too badly bruised.
I've really, really enjoyed it, and I've taken away a lot of knowledge from yourself, especially from the book. Like I say, it offered a lot of self-reflection, and just, you know, cemented, like I said, what I already thought about the gender battles that are going on out there, and what men should be doing. And I thank you for that, and
you
for
are very
joining
welcome.
me tonight.
Enjoyed the talk very much. We can do it again.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to have a part 2. I'd love to have a regular show, in fact. So thank you on behalf of the Family Advocates and the On Point team, and we hope to catch up with you again soon.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.